2. I lived next to him for 3 years, and in all that time, I never once saw his door open. It was strange only in hindsight, because at first, it just felt like one of those harmless details you notice and then forget. The kind of thing that belongs to apartment living, where everyone mostly keeps to themselves. But the thought came back to me one night, too. I realized I couldn't remember a single moment when the hinges had creaked or the lock had turned. I couldn't recall the hallway as shifting the way it always does when a door opens. Once that idea settled in my mind, it refused to leave. It grew heavier each evening as I passed his door on my way home and felt the same stillness behind it. It was a stillness that didn't feel empty, but occupied. As if something inside was holding its breath until I went by. The building itself was old, but well maintained, and the hallway carried sound easily. This meant I heard everything, from neighbors arguing to televisions murmuring through walls. Yet from that apartment, there was only silence during the day. And at night, something else, faint movement, like fabric being dragged slowly across the floor, or the careful shift of weight from one foot to another. The sounds were so subtle that at first, I convinced myself they were just the pipes, until I started noticing they only happened when I was awake, and only when I stood near the door. That was when the idea formed that whatever was behind it was aware of me. In the same way I was becoming aware of it. I mentioned the neighbor casually to the woman across the hall one afternoon. I asked if she had ever met him. She looked confused before telling me no one had lived there recently. I just laughed it off, because the mailbox for that unit was always full. The electricity meter moved, and there were sounds at night. All of it pointed to a presence. Even if it was one that preferred not to be seen. Over the following weeks, I began to notice changes in my own routine that I couldn't fully explain. Small things, like my shoes being placed slightly differently than I remembered, or my coat hanging on the hook with the sleeves smoothed down, as if someone had taken the time to straighten them. Each time, I questioned myself, because there was no sign of forced entry and nothing was ever missing. There was only a sense that someone had been careful with my things, in a way that felt intimate rather than intrusive. The nights grew worse as the sounds behind the neighbor's door became more distinct, more frequent. Not louder, but closer, as if the space between us was shrinking. Sometimes, when I stood in my kitchen late at night, I felt certain that the wall separating our apartments was no longer solid, but thin and pliable. A boundary that could be pressed against from the other side. More than once, I caught myself turning toward it, as if expecting to see a shape pushing through. Sleep became shallow and restless. I'd wake with the distinct impression that someone had been standing beside my bed just moments before, watching me, learning the exact rhythm of my breathing. But when I checked the locks, they were always secure. This only deepened the unease, because it meant the presence I felt didn't need doors to come and go. One evening, I returned home to find my lights on and my apartment warm. The thermostat had been adjusted to a setting I preferred but couldn't remember choosing. The realization struck me that the changes were becoming more precise, more accurate. As if whoever or whatever was copying my habits was improving with practice. And that was when I understood. The door next to mine was closed to keep something in. Was closed to give it time. I tried to leave for a few days. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend. During that brief absence, I felt lighter than I had in months. But when I came back, the hallway felt wrong, stretched somehow. My own door opened more easily than before, welcoming me in with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. Because inside, everything was exactly as I would have left it if I had been the one living there uninterrupted. Down to the book, placed face down on the page I had been reading. And the glass rinsed and left to dry at the exact angle I always used. That night, I heard the neighbor's door for the first time. It wasn't opening, but adjusting, a soft sound, like a hand resting against it and then withdrawing. In that moment, I knew the process was nearly complete. The careful observation and imitation had reached its final stage. Because after that, the sounds stopped completely, as if there was no longer any need for secrecy. In the days that followed, people began greeting me in the hallway with a familiarity that felt misplaced. They've asked if I was feeling better and commented on how quiet I had been lately. When I tried to correct them, their expressions shifted with concern, as if I were the one behaving strangely. As if the version of me they had grown accustomed to was calmer, more withdrawn. More like the presence that had been studying me from behind the wall. The last night I spent there, I stood outside the neighbor's door and felt nothing behind it. No movement and no weight. Only an absence that was somehow worse than the watching had ever been. When I turned away, I saw my own apartment door was open just slightly, a sliver of warm light spilling into the hallway. In that moment, the truth settled over me with a quiet certainty. Whatever had been learning me no longer needed the empty apartment next door, because it had already stepped into my life so completely that there was no clear line left to cross. As I walked back inside, I understood that the reason the neighbor never opened the door was because one day, it would no longer be his door to open. Hooray. And by the time I realized what I had lost, the hallway was empty, the silence complete. And the space where I believed myself to be standing felt occupied by someone who knew exactly how to live my life better than I ever had.